Welcome to AXREM Insights, developing healthcare through medtech and innovation. Join Melanie Johnson and Sully Edgington as they talk with our industry leaders and experts.
Hello, I'm Melanie Johnson and I'm here with Sally Edgington. We are back a little sooner than expected with our pre-election special. Today we have the pleasure to be speaking with Ila Dobson, AXREM's Government Affairs Director, and Daniel Laing, Senior Account Director at Tendo Consulting. Now let's get ready to talk politics.
Hi, I'm Sally Edgington. I'm the co-host of the podcast and also the CEO of AXREM. And I just wanted to make it clear ahead of our discussion today that AXREM have no allegiances with any political party, and all the conversations in today's election special podcast will be around the manifestos that have been published, data, reporting that we're seeing in the news. The only time that AXREM would have a political opinion is if a party, or a government put out a view around our area that we would need to have a view on, or if we didn't agree, we would obviously put a position statement out. So I just wanted to put that out from the outset.
Hello and welcome, Ila and Daniel. And firstly, thank you for being on the show and allowing us to get to know you both a little better. Before we get into our elections conversations, just want to know a little bit more about both of you. So Ila, over to you. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Yes, okay. So I've been in the healthcare environment for a very long time. Try not to think too much about it because I started out in the National Health Service, then went on to General Electric, where I was for 37 years. And then just last year, I retired from that, and I am now continuing my role as a Government Affairs Director for AXREM, partly because throughout my tenure at GE, I would say more than 25 years of that, I was on the board of AXREM. And so I am highly connected to AXREM and its activities and deeply passionate about it. So was really keen to continue. So I was delighted when Sally asked me to continue working with AXREM, and it's a real pleasure to do that.
Couldn't stay away from AXREM, could you?
No.
I was just going to add that your youthful looks, Ila, I can't believe that you've been involved with us for so long.
Really kind, Sally. I wish I felt like that.
Thank you, Ila. And Daniel, same question to you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
Yeah, of course. Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you for inviting me to the AXREM podcast. It's always a delight whenever I have the opportunity to interact with Sally or Ila and the work you're doing. We've crossed paths in so many different areas from the work I do on healthcare. But a bit about me. My name is Daniel Laing. I work for Tendo Consulting. We are a public affairs, PR, communications, government engagement, you name it, firm, where I am a senior account director. I've been there for about 4 or 5 years, predominantly working on health policy, but I do a little bit of stuff on campaigns in the world of cybersecurity as well, but predominantly healthcare there. Before I joined Tendo and started working on all of that stuff, I spent another 5 years at an organization called DODS, who are a political intelligence and monitoring agency, where when I left, I was heading up the health team, working with lots of clients on everything from the intricacies of parliamentary procedure, which I really like, and I promise I won't go into loads of boring detail on parliamentary procedure, as well as healthcare and what's coming out of Parliament and things like that. Before that, I worked at a children's charity doing public affairs on wheelchair services during the coalition years. Had a lot of fun looking at the Health and Social Care Bill and how that changed the NHS. And before that, I did lots of local government research projects, which was a lot of fun. Involved walking around with a Vox Pop camera, sometimes talking to people about how they felt about changes to the Vauxhall gyratory and stuff in London. So a lot of different things. And before that, I did a bit of work post my master's in the world of international relations, working in think tanks before I started working in sort of this field that I am now. And yeah, I mean, that's me. That's my career so far. I won't get into my, that I like long walks and things that just yet, but I'm sure we can find time for that.
Thanks, Daniel. And you were a no-brainer when I come up with the idea of pre-election podcast, because obviously we've had a lot of dealings over the last few years, and I can see with all the conversations I've had with you, you're definitely the expert, and know what's going on. So I think my first question really to you is, how do you think the election campaigns are going? Obviously, we're seeing the debates on TV, which I've watched a couple. Every time we switch the news on, there's more talk of, manifestos or people's pledges and all the different things that we see. So it'd be great just from your perspective to find out how you think the campaigns are going.
Yeah, of course, happy to. Well, I mean, I guess it's our FA Cup final in the world of public affairs and government engagement. So, you've got to enjoy these things. I know some people get a bit fatigued with them, but I mean, there are some things that I watch and through gritted teeth, not even thinking about political allegiances here, just purely because it's not been an election. In fact, we haven't had one for quite a long time that's been focused on policy. It's fair to say it's been about moments and mood and incidents. I mean, I guess we've had almost a week of coverage at one point about one thing or another, whether it's Sky TV or the D-Day incidents and all of these different things that happen on the campaign trail. It's great to watch in our area. I'd say, how is it going? Well, obviously, you have to take polling with a grain of salt, and no one can be seen to be presupposing the result of the election. But obviously, we do see the polling heavily weighted towards a Labour majority. And I think the language that you're seeing coming out of Conservative camps indicates that too, with talking about stopping a supermajority. You've had people like Jeremy Hunt, I think, talking about the need for a strong opposition. And you've even seen analysis in the news about seats that are 20,000 majorities, unthinkable to lose, now being very much target seats. So it does seem that we are on course for a Labour majority government. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. Of course, lots of polling about how big that majority is. Could it be one of the biggest we've seen in a long time? And would a 97 style Labour landslide actually be seen as quite a good result for the Conservatives? With some polling putting them down as low as sort of 80 seats or less. I think you're also seeing an interesting thing going on in Scotland, where the SNP are not polling as well as they were, and where those seats are going. I think Labour will obviously be targeting lots of those too. The Lib Dems may well have a good performance, and I'll be certainly banking on it. And then you've got the likes of Reform and the Nigel Farage effect there. So it's been a really interesting election. Has certainly not gone as well as the Conservative Party would have liked. I think that's fair to say. In a way, you could say that the situation that you've had in government with some of the kind of drama there has made its way into the campaign. And historically, for what's been a really effective campaigning machine in the Conservatives, this is quite a unique election in that respect. And of course, I said before, there hasn't been a lot of policy. We've had the manifestos and we've had all the TV debates, and a TV debate where you're asked, in 45 seconds, tell us how you're going to solve waiting lists in the NHS. You're not going to get a whole lot of policy. So from my side as well, I mean, where I guess people like me and Ila and others who work in government relations come in, it's not so much about predicting the result of the election, but it's about helping prepare for what comes next and all the different contingencies and what that very different political landscape might look like. So I hope that answers your question, Sal.
Definitely, yeah. And you spoke about moments, mood and incidents. Do you think there's been any moments yet within the campaigning?
Well, we've got one right now, haven't we? We've moved on from D-Day and having Sky TV. We're now looking at the betting and gambling situation, which I'm sure in the remaining debates we have left, which isn't many. This is our last full week of campaigning. I think we're 10 days out now from the election. I think that will obviously be quite a big focus. It'll be quite a big moment. I'm sure it will come up as a comms professional, you kind of look at these things and you think, well, I wouldn't have advised such and so to say that, or I wouldn't have said that. But I mean, without being in the campaign tent, you never really know. But there's been plenty of kind of moments that capture the public's mood, and that's certainly one of them.
I find with a lot of these things with politics, the perception of the public's really important. And I think that the trust in politics is probably at an all-time low. And that's probably my personal opinion based upon lots of different things that have happened during COVID and, since and during this campaigning. So you mentioned about there possibly being a large majority. If there were, this is sort of a question that I kind of got to myself is, if there was a large majority for Labour, would it take some of the democracy out of the decision-making within government? Because obviously if Labour won that many seats and there isn't as much opposition, do you think that would impact, would everything go Labour's way? And, that's always my worry, is that I want there to be a democracy where debates are debated and everyone's got an opportunity to kind of reach a decision.
Of course, yeah. Well, I think you've hit on two really important points there, Sally. One is, before I get onto the democracy element, is the trust in politicians. About over 12 months ago or so, when looking at what this election might be like, kind of looked at people like Keir Starmer and we looked at Rishi Sunak, and we kind of felt that, well, given what's come before with 3 prime ministers in 3 months and all of the kind of years before that, actually they were probably aiming to have quite a boring election deliberately to kind of show that politics can be free of drama. It can focus on what people want. And I think that's the kind of campaign maybe Keir Starmer has tried his best to stick to. And maybe it hasn't been quite the case with the Conservative campaign. It hasn't gone the way they wanted with a shift on that front. So I think that's really important too. And that will be really important post-election, making sure that there is seen to be an impact as early as possible to win that trust back, because people are naturally going to be sceptical, and you might see that in the turnout for the election too. It might be a low turnout election. I mean, it's hard to say, but on the kind of what the landscape of Parliament looks like, I mean, that's that. Yes, if you have a really strong majority, it changes things massively. One of the things you'll obviously see is more focus on long-term planning, which we haven't really seen for a long time. And that can be good news too. We obviously want a strong opposition because that is how our parliamentary democracy functions best. But also things like, the things that maybe didn't appear in the manifesto, like medical device regulation, the UK CEA mark, they were never going to appear in the manifesto. But if you do have a strong majority, there can be maybe more time to look at things that need to be solved like that maybe don't appear in the public sphere as much. Parliament has its own mechanisms to make sure that there's always scrutiny. The parliamentary select committees and all of these other things will always play a key role. So I think it will be, you're hearing even Keir Starmer talking in a way that is, he doesn't really seem to really want a massive whopping majority in some respects. And I just add on again, the parliamentary landscape will change. If in a situation where if the Conservatives do get massively wiped out, and you had a situation where they weren't even the official opposition or wherever they come, that changes massively, because you look at prime minister's questions and how they're selected. You'd have different people with different allocations of questions. You look at select committees, different numbers of select committee chairs, and the balance of parliament. So yeah, it would change a lot. It's a massively different political landscape anyway, but with a really big majority, it's a very different environment to be working in.
Yeah, I think it's exciting potentially, but it's also the fear of the unknown, what a new government might look like. But I'll bring Ila in now with the next question. So Ila, with a potential change to government, what could it look like for the NHS and industry, do you think?
Yeah, great question, Sally. So, listening to Daniel talk there and the comments that you've made, it's obvious that one of the biggest potential issue is the change that's likely to come about as a result of what looks like a possibly different government, right? And I think from industry's perspective, what we want to do is to continue to serve the NHS in the best way. But not only that, we want to shape the outcomes that the NHS is trying to deliver. We want to be a part of it. And we've got great data about how things work. It's our industry that actually delivers the equipment and services, let's say, or medical devices that enable the NHS to start right at the beginning, which is diagnosis. There's a lot being said in the long-term plan and in what the NHS is trying to do about early diagnosis. It impacts every disease area, not just cancer. And I think that with whatever has been going on with the recent government, with the things that are being put into place by the NHS, the Department of Health, there's lots of great work going on. You know, the recommendations that were written by Mike Richards have been followed through in a brilliant way. Great outcomes from that. The NHS England is following through with great initiatives like the Task and Finish group that industry is involved in, which is really a quick, fast, quick win exercise to hit the things that could have an impact in delivering better outcomes. So I would like to see continuity, definitely, in those areas. And what it would mean if there is a change of government, which looks likely, we'd have to very quickly snap into action and make the key players aware of what's important and give them the data so that they can make data-driven decisions with us and help support what's already working. It would be tragic, quite honestly, if the good work that's already ongoing is stopped altogether or it doesn't continue in the way that it potentially should. What I'd really hope for is that they come with great ideas, even more ideas than the ones that we're exercising. There's more capacity and initiative, you know, to facilitate, let's say, what industry is doing, work in partnership with us, collaboratively. That's what I would hope for, I think. And I think, as you know, Sally, we've talked a great deal in AXREM about what plans we have with parliamentarians. So I think, we would very quickly step into those things. But I do slightly fear, I would say, what the change in government would potentially bring to our industry. And the greatest worry, of course, is, how that impacts on patient outcomes moving forward.
Absolutely. And you mentioned continuity. My concern would be that a lot of effort has gone into the Department of Health and Social Care's medtech strategy, which we're very aligned to and supportive of. Obviously, we do a lot of work through the National Imaging Board and the Diagnostic Industry Advisory Group as well. And I hope that all of those work streams continue, because it would be a shame that we've come so far and, a lot of work has been done in some of those areas. Going over to you, Daniel, do you think there'll be any major impact with a potential new government on NHS and industry, and on kind of what do you foresee that they might be?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I think to say with, I've talked a little about the change in Parliament, but also with a change in government comes a period where the civil service will be relied upon a huge amount by the new ministers coming in. They will already have been preparing briefs and recommendations, and it is certainly the case that if there was a consultation or something out there, it would be for the new government to decide what happens with that. But they don't automatically sort of clear the decks. They rely quite heavily on the civil service and reviewing what has come out and leaning on them quite heavily. So, I mean, your relationships that AXREM has been building with those individuals and the engagements there has certainly all feed into that. And that's really positive things that have been happening. So from that perspective, I think you would see that lots of things continue on as normal. I think you will probably, particularly in areas around waiting lists and the pledges you've seen in the manifestos already about CT scanners and MRIs from the Labour side, just one example, those will be things they'll want to, depending on what they are, implement sooner rather than later. And I think the waiting lists element and the solutions that AXREM can offer in that area and AXREM's members will, that's a really quite a big opportunity, because they will want to be seen to make an impact. I mean, those monthly stats that come out, the NHS stats, I mean, they won't stop after a general election. They come out, and if they get worse with time, there certainly will be pressure to make an impact. So I think that might be where you see some of the bigger announcements, but I wouldn't expect, if NHS senior civil servants and others have been working on policy, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to continue on. Things like the medtech strategy are quite, I can't speak for the new government, but they're quite sensible things having to be happening. So not necessarily a major reorganisation of the NHS or anything like that, but there will be some things on waiting lists and those manifesto pledges.
With regard to bringing down waiting time, I don't know if I've missed something, but I haven't seen kind of that immediate focus on workforce. Is there anything that you can obviously add to that? Have you seen anything around that? Because that doesn't seem to be their immediate focus, which to me would be kind of a key thing.
Yeah, well, I think that one thing that tends to happen when we get into that really top level campaign mode is you end up with conversations about nurses and doctors, which is brilliant. But obviously there is a much wider specialist NHS workforce as well in areas I work in, like radiotherapy and likewise in diagnostics and things I do in pharmacy. There is a need to address a number of workforce issues, and that will certainly be won't have gone unrecognised, even if it hasn't been within the debate. It's a massive national issue of importance, and it will certainly feature, I would think, in the briefings that civil servants will be putting in front of new ministers. I'm always given examples by people who've worked as special advisors about how they kind of, when they land in post-government, they're told that the civil service is at the minister's disposal, and then provided with these briefings, maybe a top 3 or a top 10 issue. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but I'd be shocked if workforce didn't feature within those, because it's something that's going to be integral to all of the health policy pledges that every party has made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. Back to you again, Daniel. What do you think the first 100 days are going to look like with the new government?
Well, I jotted down some words to try and kind of get a feeling before this. And I came up with busy, noisy, and chaotic. And the reason I say that is because within Parliament, you're going to see probably, there are 650 MPs, and we may see as many as 300 new members of Parliament. And some of them would not have expected to be there, because they wouldn't have expected the result to go the way it may well go, particularly if what the polls are predicting are the case. And I think members of the public, not all of them, but sometimes might assume that when Parliament starts up, the MPs are inducted and things sort of straight back to normal. The reality is very different from that. There's offices that need to be set up, staff that need to be appointed. Some of them won't get their offices until way into August. Email addresses even won't be necessarily immediately set up. I always think, whenever as a general election, I always pick up an old copy I've got of Paul Flynn's book, How to Be an MP, and just read the section on that. And it's always more chaotic than I remember the last time I read it. So a lot has to happen for the MPs. A lot has to happen to set up the machinery of Parliament. You've got the Speaker re-election. You've got the committee chairs to all be re-elected for all of their processes. All party parliamentary groups, all these bodies that people engage with, they were all dissolved when the general election was called and will have to be reformed. So on the parliamentary front, massively different, not just in the predicted makeup of parliamentarians, but also the structures will, there's a big change or big reformation that needs to happen there. The predictions are that, we're looking at candidates, they'll be much younger and more diverse candidates, maybe not as much as we would probably like them to be in some cases. I can't predict what the next 650 set of MPs will look like, but I think the youth and age and demographic of those people will be very different from what's come before. And then on the government side, I think Labour have said that they wouldn't call an immediate snap budget. They notify the OBR in the way they need to. So you've got a budget on the horizon. You've got party conferences in the autumn. You've got probably a summer break, but maybe a little bit shortened with a time back in Parliament, but that will mostly be about setting things back up. So it's going to be quite an intense period, and it's going to be quite demanding. On the government side, they'll be bunkering down, looking at what they need to put out in that King's speech and the opening of Parliament, what they want to do in the first 100 days. So it's going to be quite a noisy period, and knowing what you want and knowing what your offer is, what you can give, what solutions are available as an industry, and be able to boil that down that's really important if you need to get cut through in that period. I mean, just slightly in addition to the question, I think there's a really important role for the likes of AXREM members to play with on showing local value, where they're in constituencies. There's a massive element to play and show and build those new alliances, because there is going to be a lot of new faces.
Daniel, just talking about the APPGs, so we're obviously involved with the radiotherapy one and also the diagnostics one. Do you think that they're likely to reform in the same way? Will all the APPGs basically just reform, or do you think they could be different? Some will be lost, there could be new ones. Is that kind of how it works?
So you're quite right, Sally. There is going to be people thinking about change in the space. We've got a whole new set of rules around all party parliamentary groups. There was a report from one of the parliamentary committees on procedure a while back. I won't go into loads of detail, but effectively the rules change the way those need to be registered, and and there are limits on the numbers parliamentarians can be members of, and that may in fact impact the numbers. But going back to my point about the number of new MPs as well, I don't think necessarily which APPGs they will join will be the top of the agenda for a lot of those to begin with. So there'll be a really important role for those groups to play in engaging with those members and getting those new people involved. Where there are people with healthcare backgrounds out there already, I'm sure there'll be candidates everyone will be seeking if they're on one of those healthcare or party parliamentary groups. I mean, I think there was 8 cancer-focused APPGs in that last parliament. I don't know whether that will remain the same, but I mean, cancer is a major issue. It may well do, but the overall number could well come down because of those new rules and because of the different set of parliamentarians you've got. But they'll all need to be registered and reformed. They'll have to hold their inaugural meetings and do all the things they need to do at the start. And that adds to the kind of chaos, busy, noise words I added down. It's all going to be part of it. But that will take some time. I wouldn't expect any of that to happen immediately. You've got, as I said, all these other bits of the machinery of Parliament to happen, and with the setting up of a new government, it won't be immediate. I wouldn't expect it for a little while.
It'll take a bit of time. Absolutely.
Thank you, Daniel. I think you described probably the first 100 days perfectly. Hectic. I imagine they probably will be.
I think so.
So thank you. Ila, what do you see the first 100 days looking like?
Yeah, I do completely understand and agree with what Daniel is saying. So look, from an AXREM perspective, the health of our nation intersects closely with the health of our economy and the health of our planet. And that's why it's key election topic for all political parties to look at this point. Given this alignment, AXREM would want the next generation to prioritize a number of things, I would say. So, firstly, I would say, planning for the longer term. We would ask planning around capital equipment replacement, investment in new technologies like AI, development of new facilities to be done on a much longer time frame than at present. So, it will be really good to have some, said continuity earlier, some continuity on that. And then the next thing would be to accelerate adoption and innovation, because our members, or AXREM as an industry group, are global leaders in health technology and sometimes face challenges in finding ways to bring technologies at pace and at scale in the NHS particularly. You see technologies that are really effective working superbly in other parts of the globe, and they take terribly long times in the NHS because it doesn't happen in one area. Everybody, all the different trusts potentially want to do different things. It needs to be some coordination around that. The government can build on the existing good work of the Department of Health and DHSE and take it further and faster. But I do think that there needs to be some serious action around that. Although I would also say that it's probably something that's been talked about for many, many years, and we always feel that it's not done as effectively as it could be. So that's the other thing. The other thing I would say is making cybersecurity in the NHS a matter of national defence. Recent cyber attacks only reinforce the importance of strong cybersecurity that underpins our health service. With the growth of the digital health, government should make this a priority across all relevant ministries and actually take out the risks from it, because otherwise we cannot continue to deliver good healthcare. And as we've seen, it's sometimes really stalled, almost like daily activities. So it really does need to be looked at. I would say all infrastructures, not just cybersecurity, but IT related in the NHS really need to be updated and made very, very robust. And then I suppose, finally, I would say that the NHS, thinks very seriously about sustainability, which it does, and there are set targets. But I think there needs to be a deeper understanding and recognition of sustainability and the future of that in the NHS and how it depends on it being sustainable as an organisation in the widest meaning of that term. Government should lead in introducing circular economy, models linked to value-based healthcare, to ensure the public maximise their return on investment in a world-class healthcare provider that the NHS is recognised to be. So look, and I think there's many, many more, but I would say those are some of the key things. And of course, AXREM looks forward to working closely and supporting the next government address these key health priorities. So we're ready and waiting to go into action with government.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Ila, so some of my priorities in the first couple of months of, whatever our new government looks like is for us to identify the key MPs and parliamentarians that have an interest in our area, and obviously the health team, but also build some relationships with the new MPs that we haven't previously spoken to. So that's obviously going to be high up on our agenda. And we want to make sure that the MPs understand, the importance of diagnostic imaging and radiotherapy. Obviously, we have issues with aged equipment in diagnostic imaging and accessibility to radiotherapy, and we want to make sure that that's, high up on their agenda. And obviously, with cancer waiting times and other things, I would, hope that it is, and we'll be having the right messaging around that. And it hopefully leads quite nicely the fact that we'll be releasing our new strategic priorities on the 3rd of September, which hopefully should be quite timely that we do that then. And hopefully the MPs will all kind of really understand who we are and what our focus is, and understand that we really do want to work with the government to address these, because our industry really can address some of these big issues and key issues that are in their manifestos and as part of their party pledges.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sally. All of that is highly relevant.
Thank you both. So, Ila, you just touched on some of the key points that you feel need addressing. So what do you aim to do as the AXREM Government Affairs Director to help obviously achieve these goals and aspirations?
Sally's just said quite a few of the key things, that we'll be aiming to do, or I'll be aiming to lead for AXREM. Firstly, it would very much be about, our members have a massive wealth of information and data about how things work today. We've talked about waiting times, waiting lists, early diagnosis. We've talked about aged assets. All of that data is up to date and available with our members. And I think, firstly, as part of that strategic document and also understanding what our members know, I would be looking to align that first with our membership. And then the next thing would be to, with the relevant parliamentarians that Sally's also been talking about, it would be pertinent to make them aware of the key facts and actually connect with the key members that are related to healthcare or the various areas that, that we're looking at, and give them the data, give them the information and the awareness, and give some recommendations, and offer the opportunity of working with them very quickly in a collaborative way, so that we can forge the right way forward in terms of how things are done. So it would very much be a collaborative effort with, what we as AXREM as an industry know would be the right way forward in order to deliver all of the things that we've been speaking about. And of course, hitting the ground very quickly with the new MPs, potentially. They may not be new MPs, we just don't know, and to actually align and start working very quickly with them. I think the other key part would is they will also have ideas that they would want to talk about and implement very quickly. And it will be good to start debating that very, very early on with AXREM memberships, to see whether there are different ways of doing things and delivering things that we are trying to deliver today. So yeah, it will really be about partnerships and collaboration, working with the right teams, I would say, right from the start.
Absolutely. And I think we're in a very unique position as a trade association that with some modalities, such as MR and CT, we represent almost or 100% of the market. So it's a great place for us to be in terms of government coming and speaking to one industry group rather than lots of individual companies. Moving on from that, Daniel, what else do you think AXREM and our members can do to position ourselves in the best possible place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Ila's hit the nail on the head with the need to make sure that engagement, you've got intelligent engagement, that the solutions of the members are brought to the new members of parliament and returning members of parliament, and indeed the government and the civil service. Of course, again, your strength is your membership. I think you've got, as you said, Sally, you've got a brilliant membership full of solutions that can help the next government, whoever it is, with some of the biggest, most pressing issues of the day. So I think the trick will be to cut through. I mean, I use the word chaos. It won't really be chaos, but it will be very noisy earlier. But to cut through that noise, and that will be everything from, strong parliamentary engagement where there are relevant debates, making sure that, that AXREM's voices and so those solutions of the membership are well briefed. I know you guys have held events in the past. I think that's a very sensible thing to do, where you can present those solutions and that data in a way that brings the issues into the living room of and constituency indeed of parliamentarians. I mean, just in some of the work we've done in the world of radiotherapy, just providing the NHS cancer waiting times for a constituency just brings home the need for those solutions. And then you point to the fact that there is an industry who stands ready to help, and that can help make more and more those individuals in your membership or AXREM as a whole, rather, that kind of go-to voice for the parliamentary and the government debates. So there's a little bit of volume, just making sure that your voice is out there. In the work we do, sometimes we will do fully integrated campaigns, and we'll bring in the media and try and have a spokesperson there to be in the public, because of course, decisions aren't just driven by what MPs say and do in Parliament. There's a public element of it too. There is the media and that voice. So there's a little bit of that as well, I think, just to bear in mind. But also, I think, going back to your membership, I mean, the local value those companies bring in their spaces. I mean, MPs are always very proud when they're able to go to a local industry body who are actively contributing to innovations and technology that help bring down waiting lists and have a real impact on their constituency. Of course, you'll be employing people in their constituency too. So, I mean, that's one area that's a really brilliant way of doing things too. And showing that local value, that's one way to get champions on board. Identifying the members of Parliament who have a massive interest in your area. People throw around the words like stakeholder mapping and things like that. But in reality, that it's like identifying people who have maybe they've had a personal experience or they have a professional background in the space. They're potential really big champions early on. But of course, I mean, that we can't forget the House of Lords as well. We talk about all the change in the House of Parliament, but there'll be a House of Lords which doesn't have a general election, so that will remain the same. They of course they have conventions where they make sure that they don't oppose or try and destroy the agenda of the governing party if they put it in their manifesto. But that's a really cool role for them to play too, because there's a bit more time there and scrutiny. And so with that, local value MPs, your champions, the House of Lords, bringing that all together with the media and all the other things you do in a campaign, I think that's the way I think that you get that cut through. Lots of different things. I hope that helps.
It really does. Thank you.
Okay, so now a bit of a change in tone from quite serious to end on a bit of a light-hearted question. So my quirky question. So I'll start with you, Ila. If you could hang around with any famous person, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Well, do you know what? I want to be more local about a famous person I want a day with, because of who they were. Sadly, they're no longer alive. So it's Clarissa Dickson Wright, actually. There's lots of people that I used to find really amusing and followed, and she was definitely one of them. And do you know what? I did have the good fortune to meet her once before she passed away, and she was at a show in Melton Mowbray at a food show. And when we stood there chatting to her, do you know what? It really drove home the capacity of a human being to be in so many different spaces. She's a highly intelligent lady, very, very knowledgeable about multiple things. We were there because she was at an agricultural show. And so she was highly connected with our need to eat. So she was very grounded and rounded about what we need as human beings. I think we forget that sometimes. People may be in one area and they just think about that one thing. She didn't. She understood healthcare. She understood the need for food. She understood environment. She was amazing, really funny, inspiration. And the other thing was she'd had such adversity in her life. She had an addiction. She was an alcoholic. And she coped with all of that and came through all of that on her own. Now, obviously, I didn't find all that out in the 20-minute conversation we had. It was through the various things. Some of you may remember her. She did a program with another lady called Jennifer Patterson. They used to be called the Two Fat Ladies, and they did a cookery show. And do you know what? Throughout that program, if you've ever watched any, or you can watch them on, the previous recordings there are, they were bantering all the time about their lives, what they did. So look, I just found them highly, her particularly, very inspirational. I'm sad slightly that I didn't write to her before she died and spent that time with her and got to know a little bit more. It was just really about that human capacity to deal with any situation and make things work. It was inspirational.
Well, thank you. She sounds amazing. And what was it called? Two Fat Ladies cookery show?
Yes, Two Fat Ladies.
Oh, I've made a note of that. I'll have to go back and look at that. That sounds good. Thank you. And Daniel, same question to you.
So, like in the professional world, I guess, I know nobody wants to talk about it much anymore, but, the subject of Brexit, I'd be fascinated to sit on the other side of the table with someone like Angela Merkel or something and just hear, my German's not brilliant, so I'd be relying on her a little bit to understand what everything looked like from the other side. I think that would be fascinating as a conversation, having, lived through it on our side and worked in public affairs and done some of the really hard to wrap your head around parliamentary procedural stuff around all the things that were happening in Parliament. I'd love to have that conversation from a professional point of view. But from a personal point of view, I might be getting a bit niche for some here, but I'm really interested in Strongman as an event. You see it around Christmas coming on the television, World's Strongest Man and all of that. I'd really like to, I think, someone like Tom Stoltman, the Scottish current World's Strongest Man. I'd love to have a conversation with him because I think the level of training and the sort of everything that goes into that is interesting. I think I did think about saying someone in the football world, but I thought I'll try and pretend I'm more interesting and talk about World's Strongest Man. I hope that's
And that is a really good one.
Do you actually train, or is it just watching?
I watch it, but I also I like powerlifting, which is a slightly different sport, but it's similar worlds. I've not yet tried to lift a 200 kilo stone and place it on a pedestal myself. Certainly wouldn't know where to start with that.
I was just going to say that you don't go out on the drive and lift your car very frequently.
No, that's not me.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to wrap up the podcast now to say thank you so much to Daniel and Ila. It's been a really interesting conversation and hopefully our listeners will find it very interesting and quite informative as well. So thanks for telling us more about yourself, but also for discussing the election campaigns and what we think the future political landscape might look like. So a big thank you to Ila and Daniel for being our guests for today, and thank you to the listeners.
This was a one-off pre-election special. Join Sally and I again at the end of summer, where we will be speaking to AXREM partners. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe or feel free to share the podcast with friends.